this is now the hypothetical syllogisms. And we are also going to discuss one particular type of syllogism or argument, which is called the enthymeme. So I will explain what is the enthymeme later on, but we will discuss first the hypothetical syllogisms. Okay. Now, remember that one of the types of propositions is the hypothetical proposition. And the hypothetical propositions are the following. You have the conditional proposition, you have the disjunctive proposition, and the conjunctive proposition. Okay? So what is the conditional proposition? The conditional propositions are the conditional proposition is the if-then statement. The disjunctive proposition is the either-or statement. And, of course, the conjunctive proposition is somehow the reverse of the disjunctive, which uses and instead of or. So when you construct a syllogism out of these hypothetical propositions, like for example, your major premise is a conditional proposition, then your syllogism is called conditional syllogism. Okay? And if your major premise is a disjunctive proposition, then the syllogism is called disjunctive syllogism. And if one of your premises is a conjunctive proposition, then the syllogism is called a conjunctive syllogism. So let's discuss first the conditional syllogism. Okay? So the conditional syllogism is composed of conditional proposition as major premise, and then categorical propositions as minor premise and conclusion. Now remember the major premise, that's the first premise, then the minor is the middle proposition, the second premise, and then of course the last one is the conclusion. Okay? So here is an example. If it rains, then the ground is wet. It rained, ergo, meaning therefore, the ground is wet. Okay? Another example, if there is no law, then no order in society. But there is order in society. Therefore, there is law. Okay? So this is the major premise, this one. This is the minor premise. This is the conclusion. If there is no law, that's the major premise. There is order, there is the minor premise, and ergo there is law, that's the conclusion. Right? Now, when you have a syllogism like this, of course, part of analyzing and checking whether this argument is valid or invalid is drawing the schema. The schema, as we've said, is the pattern of the syllogism. Okay? So, this is how we draw the pattern here on this side. P, okay, P stands for it rains. This is the antecedent. Remember our discussion on the conditional. The antecedent and the consequent. Okay? So P stands for the antecedent and Q stands for the consequent. This sign here, usually it's a horseshoe sign, or sometimes it's a greater than sign. It's a sign of condition. Okay? So it rained, that means P. So you just copy rain, it rained, P here. And then the conclusion, ground is wet. So if ground is wet is Q, then in the conclusion, it is also Q. So again, you use the P and the Q, right? In order to draw the pattern. So if there is no law, P. Now, take note that that is a negative statement, right? No law. And we use this symbol as a form of negation. This is negative. Instead of using the minus, okay, the minus sign. I hope you can see that in the camera, in the screen. we use the curl to symbolize it's a negative. Well, you can still also use this, but this is the more conventional sign, the curl. Okay? So, you put the curl here. Okay? So, if there is no law, then so you use this. Okay? So, it's either the horseshoe or this one. Your choice. Okay? Okay? And then, no order in society. So, not you. Do you follow? You follow, class?
Sir, question.
Yes.
What is the definition of the horseshoe?
The horseshoe is this horseshoe means if then. So the horseshoe here is if then. That's a symbol of conditional. Okay? So here, this means conditional. Okay,
Sir,
or
please.
yeah, yes, sir.
Sir, cannot see the board.
You cannot see the board. Oh wait,
Yes.
cannot see the board. Sister, can you see it now?
Not yet, sir.
Oh, wait. How about the others? Can you see the board?
Yes, sir.
Sister, the problem could
Yeah.
be
So, cannot
from
see.
your end. Uh, oh, everybody can see the board. Mm-hmm. All right. Can you see it now,
Okay.
sister?
Not yet, sir.
Not yet. Oh, God. Uh-huh. Oh. But can you see my PowerPoint?
PowerPoint, yes, I can see, sir.
You can see the
Can see
PowerPoint,
PowerPoint, but cannot see.
Yes, sir.
but you cannot see the board.
Yes, sir.
Wait. Earl, paano to?
Uh, Cell phone or laptop?
Are you using cell phone or laptop, sister? Sister, are you using a cell phone or a laptop? Ah, wait. Wala si sister. Anyway, sister, this is being recorded. If you can, I think you can watch this. You can see the board when you replay when you view the lecture again. Okay. Uh, oh, nawala si sister. Baka sa connection niya. Okay. Anyway, let me just. So I hope. Oh, mukhang may problema yung nasa labas ng Pilipinas. Okay. Anyway.
Okay, now I
Okay
can
now.
see, sir.
Okay. Good. I think it's in the
Yes.
connection system. Good. Okay. So let's
Yes, sir.
wait. Mhm. Presentation. Wala yung camera ko. So okay, so let's continue with this one. Okay, so there. So if there's no law, then no order in society. So no law. This is negative p. Then so this is the symbol of conditional. If then, okay, and I will write here. P means the antecedent. This is the if part. Okay. I hope you can see the board. And Q is the consequent. This is the then part. Okay? And we use curl or the negative sign. It means negative. No. Okay? No. Or not. Okay? So, if there's no law, then no order in society, not P, then not Q, then there is order in society. So, remember, the Q is the order in society. So, you write Q here. And the conclusion is, ergo, there is law. P. So, this is now the schema of this syllogism. Okay, that's the schema of that syllogism. So, show you this. So, let's go now to the laws of the conditional. Okay? So, the law states, if P, meaning the antecedent here, is accepted, then the Q, meaning the consequent, must also be accepted. Okay? Oh, no. Let me explain that. I will give you another example. So I hope you get this. Okay, the symbols. Okay. So again, I will write here this one. This means if, then. That's the conditional sign. Okay? So if the antecedent is accepted, then the consequent is also accepted. Why? Because the antecedent, okay, you call it like this. The antecedent, okay, is the condition, okay, the cause, and the consequent is the effect, or the cause or reason, or the result. So when you say if then, if this is the antecedent, if this is the reason, if this reason is accepted, then the effect or the result must also happen. Okay? Like for example, say, if it rains, then ground, G is ground, is wet. Let me just erase this. I hope you already have this, right? So we can have bigger, wider space. Then ground is wet. Okay? So this is the antecedent, the cause, and the ground sweat is the result. So this is the reason for the ground to be wet. Rain is the reason for the ground to be wet. So if you accept this, it rained. You accepted the cause or the reason. Therefore, you must also accept the result. Therefore, remember design, this is ergo, right? Therefore, ground is wet. That's the rule of conditional, the first rule. Right? If you accept, if you affirm, if you posit the antecedent or the reason or the cause, then you must also accept the consequent or the result. That's the first rule. So if you say, if you study, then you will pass. So meaning studying is the condition for passing. If that condition is accepted, you said, he studied. What should be the conclusion? The conclusion should be, therefore, you pass. Okay, because that's the antecedent or the condition set by the proposition. Okay? So, or if you say, if you believe in Christ, then you are a Christian. This person believes in Christ. So what's the conclusion? Then he's a Christian. Okay, so that's the first rule of the conditional. Okay. Even if in our conversation, if you give an example, you say, suppose a parent says, if you get good grades, then you will have good reward. Well, the child got good grades, therefore he must be given a reward because that's the condition. Okay, I hope that's clear. Now let's move on to the next. If the consequent is denied, meaning it was not accepted, it was rejected, then the antecedent must also be denied. Okay, so let's use this example again. We deny the consequent. How do we deny the consequent? Well, if you say ground is wet, to deny that means that the ground is not wet. So you deny this. You rejected. What should be the conclusion? Anyone? Hello? Hello?
It did not rain.
It did not rain, correct? It did not rain. So if you deny this, you deny the reason, meaning the cause did not happen at all, then the consequence should not also be accepted. Okay? So if you say, if you study, then you will pass. You did not pass. That means you did not study. Okay? If you are a pagan, you don't believe in God, but you believe in God. That means you are not a pagan. Okay? You understand? Hello? Is that clear? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Now let's go to the third rule. If the antecedent is denied, then the consequent is doubtful, meaning there will be no definite conclusion. Why is that? Suppose we say that it did not rain. It did not rain. If it rains, then the ground is wet. But it did not rain. The rule says there's no conclusion is doubtful. Why doubtful? Because in this argument, in an argument like this, when you say this is the antecedent and this is the consequent, you are not saying that this is the only cause or reason. This is just one of the reasons for the effect to happen. So, for example, in this case, if you say, if it rains, then the ground is wet, it means that rain is one of the causes or reasons for the ground to be wet. If that reason, the rain, did not happen, you're not sure whether the ground is wet or not. Because even if it did not rain, the ground could still be wet. Why? Well, there are other reasons for the ground to be wet. Somebody poured water, okay, then the ground could be wet. Or it could not be wet. So you're not sure. It could be wet or not wet. In that case, you are not sure of the conclusion. Okay? So for example, you say, if you are a Catholic, then you are a Christian. Or a person is a Catholic, then he's a Christian. My friend is not Catholic. Does it mean that my friend is not a Christian? Well, he can be a Christian or not a Christian. Because being a Catholic is just one of the reasons for one to be a Christian. He may not be a Catholic, he can be a Protestant, but still a Christian. So you are not sure of the conclusion in that case. Okay? Clear? I hope you understand that. No? So if you say, if you study, then you will pass. You did not study. You deny the antecedent. You did not study. Does it mean you did not pass? Well, you could have passed also. Because studying is not just the only reason, not the only reason for you to pass. You may not have studied, but since the exam is very easy, you pass the exam. Okay? So you're not sure of that conclusion if you deny the antecedent. Okay? Now let's go to the fourth. If the consequent is accepted, then doubtful, meaning there is no definite, clear conclusion. So it rains and the ground is wet. But then you accept the consequent. You say, ground is wet. Conclusion is doubtful. Why? Again, for the same reasons as the previous rule. There are other reasons or causes for the ground to be wet, not just rain. So if the ground is wet, you can say, well, therefore it rained. No, it does not follow because the ground could be wet due to some reasons. Somebody put water. So even if it did not rain, the ground could be wet. Okay? So those are the four basic rules of conditional argument. Actually, that's a basic rule. No? Although sometimes uh, it may sound like a very complicated rule, but come to think of it, it's a pretty basic rule. If you say if uh, if I eat in a fine restaurant, then I will be satisfied. If I eat at a fine restaurant, then I will be satisfied. You ate in a fine restaurant. What's the conclusion? Well, of course, you are satisfied. Now, suppose you say, if I eat at a fine restaurant, then I will be satisfied. You are not satisfied. So that means you did not eat in a fine restaurant. Now, suppose you say, if I eat in a fine restaurant, then I will be satisfied. You follow the third rule. You say, I did not eat in a fine restaurant. Does it mean you will not be satisfied? It does not follow. You can still be satisfied even if you did not eat in a fine restaurant. Because there are other reasons for you to be satisfied, not just by eating in a fine restaurant. Well, let's follow the rule number 4. If I eat in a fine restaurant, then I will be satisfied. You accept the consequence. I was satisfied. Therefore, I ate in a fine restaurant. It does not follow. Because you can be satisfied even if, you eat somewhere else. Okay? So I hope that's clear. Those are the basic rules of the conditional. Okay? Now let's move on. Following these rules, there are two valid procedures or processes of deriving valid conclusion. The first one is positing process or positing procedure. What is this? When the minor accepts the antecedent and the conclusion accepts the consequent. So it follows rule or law number 1. Accept the antecedent accept the consequent. Okay? Now, what does it mean to accept the antecedent? Well, you don't change the antecedent. If it is affirmative, it remains affirmative. If it is negative, it remains negative. And then you accept the consequent. So practically, you don't change the conditional. You accept what is written in the conditional statement. You call this procedure, okay? Sorry, I will. You call this procedure in the positive process as constructive mode or modus ponens. Okay, modus ponens. That's the first rule. Okay, that's the first process. Let's have an example here. So again, I'm using this example because this is the easiest example. If it rains, then the ground is wet. I accept this. It rained. Then ground is wet. This is constructive process or positing process or constructive mode or modus ponens. Okay? Now suppose it is like this. Okay, so I'll put here a side window here. Let us suppose the schema is like this. If not P, P could be any antecedent, okay? Then Q. Positing process or modus ponens would be like this. Not P, then Q. Notice that I just copy the antecedent and copy the consequent. I did not change anything. Okay? That's the positing process or modus ponens. Okay? Now, let's move to the next, denying process. So here, the denying process or destructive mode, the minor denies the consequent and the conclusion denies the antecedent. It follows rule number 2. Okay? So it's like this. Ground is not wet. Therefore, it did not rain. So see here, ground is wet, ground is not wet. Okay? So the minor denies the consequent. Okay? And the conclusion says it did not rain. It rained, it did not rain. So this is a negation or rejection of the antecedent. Okay? Question? Question, class? Hello? No?
None, sir.
None? Okay. Now, let's use this. Suppose this is the conditional. If I'm going to make a denying process here, then I will go this way. If not P, then Q. So I will write Q here, minor, and put a negation here. Because it's Q, it should be not Q. And then in the conclusion, instead of not P, it becomes what? What's the conclusion?
E.
No, it's P. Okay? Deny the antecedent. By deny, meaning affirmative, it becomes negative. Then deny the antecedent. Negative P, it becomes P. Okay? All right. Now let's do this. Okay, let's answer this exercise, this example. So let's draw the pattern here. If the person is found not guilty, then he must be freed. But he must not be freed, therefore he is found guilty. So it will be P, okay? By the way, not found not guilty. Then he must be freed, Q. he must not be freed. What's the minor premise? What should be the minor premise? P, Q, not P, not Q,
Not Q.
not Q. Okay, not Q, not freed. Diba? So you just then found guilty. P. This is the schema of that syllogism. Okay, now let's check if it is valid. Valid or invalid? P or Q, not Q. So it denies the consequent. Not P, it becomes P. It denies the antecedent.
Valid.
It's valid. It follows rule number 2. This
Valid.
is, yes, correct. This is MT. MT means modus tollens or destructive mood. Okay? Let's take number 2. If person caught carrying unauthorized firearms, P, then he will be arrested. Q. But he will be arrested. Q. Therefore, caught carrying firearms, P. Is this valid? What do you think?
Valid.
That's a valid argument? Does it follow that if you're arrested, automatic, it's because you were caught carrying firearms?
No.
Not valid.
It's not valid. Okay? That is not a valid syllogism. Okay? So you think my friend was caught, if a person is caught carrying firearms, then he will be arrested. My friend was arrested. Does it mean that he was arrested because he was caught carrying firearms? No, he could be arrested for some other reasons, right? So that means this is an invalid conditional syllogism. Okay. And let's see another example here, number 3. This is the last, and then you can answer the other on your own. You can answer the other syllogisms, right? So commits fallacy with qualification P. So this I write here. This is an invalid argument. Okay. So then it is not valid. Then not valid. But the student, sorry, where's that? But it is valid. Therefore, does not commit any fallacy. Is that a valid argument?
Yes.
That's a valid argument. What is the process?
Empty.
M, M,
T.
tollens, ponens.
Yes po.
T, tollens.
Apo.
Okay, good, correct. This is empty. So empty means you deny this and then deny this one. MP, MP is like this. MP is P, I'm sorry, P, then Q, okay? P, therefore Q. That's MP. Okay? So I hope that is clear enough, no? Let's go now to the disjunctive syllogism. Now remember the disjunctive, it's the either or statement, okay? Either or statement, you are given 2 choices, and the choices, again, we use P and Q, okay? P and Q. And the symbol So these are the disjuncts. And the symbol of disjunction is the wedge. Okay? Wedge. Like it's like a letter V. This is wedge. This is a symbol of disjunction. Either or. Okay? The either or. So it's composed of a disjunctive proposition as major premise and categorical proposition as minor and conclusion. For example, either it rains or the crops will die. It rained, therefore the crops will not die. So if you write the schema of this, it will be like this. P, okay, or Q. So P, rains, Q, crops will die. When we use the wedge, the or, okay, it rained. So P, therefore, crops will not die, not Q. Okay, that's the symbol of this, that's the schema of that syllogism. Okay, now, so let's have another example here. There. Either there is no justice or no mercy. Okay, no justice, no mercy. Not Q, sorry, not P, or not Q. Okay, there is justice. There is P. Therefore, no mercy. So this is the schema of that argument. Okay, so that's, I think that's pretty easy. Huh? Okay, now let us go to the rules. Okay, so I'm showing you the schema, so you can see that here. That's the schema. Okay, see that in your PowerPoint, in the PowerPoint. Now remember that there are two kinds of disjunction. We have discussed this, no? The proper or the strong, and the improper or weak. What is this proper or strong? Well, they are mutually exclusive. They cannot be both true and both false at the same time. Now, like for example, it's either dead or alive. It cannot be both dead and alive. Okay. Either, for example, say present or absent. Okay. So it cannot be both present and absent. When you say improper or weak, there's a possibility for the two to be both true. Red or blue. The color of my dress is either red or blue. It can be both red and blue. So it's a weak disjunction. Okay? So we have discussed this in the disjunctive proposition. So keep that in mind. Now, based on this, there are two valid procedures. The first procedure is the positing process. That means the minor accepts one part and the conclusion denies the other part. It could be any of the two. It could be the P or the Q. Okay? And the denying process, the minor denies one part, and then the conclusion accepts the other part, whatever is left. So if it denies the P, then it will accept, the conclusion will accept the Q. Okay? If the minor denies the Q, then the conclusion will accept the P. We know already what it means, accepting or affirming, meaning we don't change. Okay? If it's affirmative, it remains affirmative. If it is negative, it remains affirmative. If we deny, then we change the quality or the quality of the statement. If it is negative, it becomes affirmative. If it is affirmative, it becomes negative. That's denying or rejecting. Okay? So let's have some examples here. I'm sorry. Let's have some example. We go back to the example we had before. So let's do this one. Okay, if it rains here, if it rains, then the crops will die, or either it rains or the crops will die. The minor accepts one part, therefore the conclusion denies the other part. So this is what? This is positing process. Okay, this is positing process. Here, either not P or not Q. P, meaning it denies this. Therefore, it accepts this. So this one is positing, and this one is denying. Okay? Just to make sure, all right? So, positing, denying. So, if it is a positing process, the minor posits, the minor or the conclusion denies. If it is a denying process, the minor denies, then the conclusion accepts. Okay? I hope that's clear. Any question? Any question? Hello? Any question?
Ano po ulit yung sa positing process?
Okay. It's like, so I will just, so I will write, I hope it's in the positing. So I will summarize here. Okay, positing. So minor accepts. Is it within the frame of the camera? Yung buo? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So minor accepts, conclusion denies. Okay, so it's like this. So P, or Q, minor accepts. P, therefore not Q. Or pwede ring P or Q, then not P. Still within the frame? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes
good.
po.
Okay. So see here, minor accepts, conclusion denies. Minor accept, conclusion denies. So when you accept, could either be P or Q. It does not matter. Unlike in the conditional, that when you accept, it should always be the antecedent that is in the minor and the consequent that is in the conclusion. Here, it does not matter. You can choose any of the two because it's just, they are alternatives, all right? So that's positing process, okay? Or it could be like this, not P or Q. Minor accepts, not P. Inaccept niya, hindi binago. Therefore, you deny this, not Q. Okay? Or it could be like this, not P or Q, except Q, deny P. That's the positing process. Denying process like this. Minor denies, conclusion accepts. So it's the reverse. So if you have this, P, then Q, not P, you see, deny, P, not P. Then accept this one, Q. If it is P or Q, deny Q, not Q, then accept P. Okay? And suppose it's like this, not P or Q. P, that's denying. Therefore, Q. Okay? So this is the summary of the rules. Okay? Questions? Questions?
None, sir.
Okay, good. If you want, you can copy this so you can have a guide. No, you can guide. You can. Now, how do we apply this rule? Remember that there are two kinds of disjunction. The proper or the improper. Okay? Can I erase this part now? If you have copied this, maybe I can erase this already. Huh? So, remember, there are two kinds of disjunction. You have the proper disjunction, okay? Proper disjunction, and the improper disjunction. If you have a proper disjunction, you can follow both the positing process and the denying process. If the disjunction is improper, you can only follow the denying process. Okay? Yung positing process will be invalid. Okay? I'm going to write here. Positing, invalid. Okay? Don't forget. If it is a proper disjunction, you can do both positing and denying. But if it is an improper disjunction, you can only follow the denying process. The positing will be invalid. Okay? Let's illustrate that. So you already have this, right? Positing, accept, deny, denying, deny, accept. Okay? So let's have an example. Let us say the color. Sorry. Let's use another example. When I grow up, I would either be a doctor. So take note of the context. Okay. When I grow up, I will either be a doctor or an engineer. Okay. I will be a doctor. Okay. Therefore, not an engineer. No? Take note. When I grow up, because this is very important. No. Grow up, I will either be a doctor or an engineer. Now, the question is this a proper or improper disjunction? Answer? Anyone?
Improper.
Pardon?
Improper disjunction.
Improper disjunction. Improper because you can be both doctor and engineer when you grow up, right? You can be a doctor and then study engineering and then study medicine, or we don't even know what doctor here. It could be PhD. So you have a PhD and you have an engineering degree. So it can be both. Now, you see, it follows the positing process. It accepts doctor and then denies engineer. But this is not a valid argument because, again, you can be both doctor and engineer when you grow up. It followed the positing process and it is invalid. Okay? Now, suppose I follow the denying process. I said, I will not be a doctor. Then it follows that you will be an engineer because you said you will either be a doctor or an engineer. Meaning, there should always be at least one that you should accept. So, you deny one, you will not be a doctor. it's automatic that you will be an engineer. Okay? Because that's the, otherwise, if you say you will not be an engineer, if you say I will not also be an engineer, then the whole thing is fallacious. The whole argument is wrong, because the argument is an either or argument. So when you say either or, there must always be one that you have to accept. Otherwise, your argument is a wrong argument. Okay? I will visit you either on Friday or on Monday. You do not visit your friend on both days. That means it's a wrong argument. It's a wrong statement at the very beginning. Okay? You understand? Now, suppose we say this is the disjunction. Pass or fail. I will either pass the subject or fail the subject. You cannot both pass and or fail, right? So if you say pass, therefore not fail. Or if you say did not pass, therefore you fail. So you can follow both the positive process or the denying process, because pass or fail is a proper disjunction. That means you can do both processes. Okay? Any question? Any question?
None, sir.
Answer.
Okay, very good. Now let's move on to the next, and that is the disjunctive, because the disjunctive is just the same as the conjunctive, only that it's kind of reverse. Okay, I'll show you why it's reverse. So again, instead of using the and, oh sorry, or, you use the negation of the end. What do you mean by negation of the end? Of end, rather. No. So again, you use P, Q, okay, and you use the end. The symbol of end actually is the dot in symbolic logic, but we are going to use this dot, sort of modify what it means, okay, in this discussion. So it has this conjunctive proposition as major, and conditional, or sorry, categorical propositions as minor and conclusion. So it's like this: suspect cannot be guilty and innocent at the same time. Okay, so if you're going to write the schema, it will be like this: cannot be P, like this. Sorry, Q. Okay, so this is rather a modified schema. No? So it cannot be P and Q. Normally we put the same time to indicate simultaneity. It's at the same time. Okay. Okay. So instead of or, we use this, but it's the same, because uh, you can also make a disjunctive proposition out of this example. Like for example, you can say the suspect is either guilty or innocent. But when you use the and we add at the same time. Okay. So, or we say the senator cannot be present and absent during the session. Conjunctive. Okay, so in the first example, you say the suspect cannot be guilty and innocent at the same time, but he is guilty, therefore he is not innocent. Okay. The second example, the senator cannot be present and absent at the same time, but the senator is not present, therefore he is absent. So the conjunctive is the same as the disjunctive, in the sense that both give alternatives. Okay, two alternatives that can either be that cannot be both true or both false. In disjunctive, the two disjuncts cannot be both false. Okay? But in a conjunctive, they cannot be both true. So that's the difference between the two. Okay. Now, as to the process of making a conclusion, so I'm showing you how it is written there, the schema. Remember that there are two kinds of conjunction that we have discussed. The two-part conjunctive, meaning they are exclusive, and the more than two-part or the multiple. Okay? So what is the two-part conjunctive? You say, well, the parent or a parent cannot be both male or mother and father at the same time. So there are only two kinds of parents, father and the mother. So that's a two-part conjunctive. But when you say uh, you cannot study and sleep at the same time, your option is not only limited to the two, studying and sleeping. Because you can play, you can sing, okay, you can do other things. So it's a multiple, it's an open conjunctive. As to the process, it follows the same process. Okay, positing process and the denying process. So very similar to the conjunctive, or sorry, similar to the disjunctive. Okay. So how do you apply the rule? Again, if you have, okay, let me summarize the rule. So you know the process already, positing and denying, it's there. But if you have a two-part conjunctive, you can follow both the positing. Positing means accept, deny, right? Or the denying process. Denying means deny, accept. But if you have a multiple conjunctive, then you can only follow the positing process. If you follow the denying process, this will be invalid. Okay? Denying is invalid. Okay? Now let's illustrate. You say, one can't be in Manila and Cebu at the same time. I follow the denying process. I say, he is not in Manila. Therefore, he is in Cebu. Question. Are you sure that the person, if he's not in Manila, automatically is in Cebu? Of course not.
No.
No, right? Because he can be or she can be in other places. But in this case, you follow the denying process. Denying process. So it's an invalid argument. Okay? But if you follow the positing process, you say he is in Manila, definitely he's not in Cebu. So you are sure of that conclusion. Okay? For the rest, two-part, that's easy because you can either follow the positing or denying process. Posit, accept, deny, 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 accept. Now, suppose you do accept, accept. Well, that's obviously wrong. You cannot do that. Or deny and deny, obviously that is wrong. That is fallacious. Okay? Questions? Questions?
None, sir.
Okay. Let's try this example here. Okay? Because I combine the conjunctive and the disjunctive. Take note the difference in the application of the rules between the disjunctive and the conjunctive syllogism. Okay? So let's take this number one. The accused is either guilt. I will either plead not guilty. Obviously, it's negation. P. Or so the weds will enter into a plea bargain. Q. Okay, but he will not enter into a plea bargain, meaning not Q. Therefore, he will plead not guilty. Okay, so that is a disjunctive. Now, the first thing that you have to do is think, is that a proper or improper disjunction? How do you know if it is proper or improper? Just ask a question, can a person, can an accused plead not guilty and enter into a plea bargain at the same time? Is that possible?
Not possible.
Not possible, right? Why would you enter into a plea bargain if you think you are not guilty, right? So again, critical thinking, okay, class, critical thinking. It's very important to understand what is being said. Okay, don't just think of the form, don't just think of the schema like this. You have to understand the statement. Okay, so it's proper or improper?
Improper.
Proper.
It's a proper disjunction. That's a proper disjunction. Now, what did he do? Deny, accept, right? This is denying process. Valid? Is it valid?
Valid.
Yes, it's a valid syllogism. So that is a valid syllogism. Okay? Let's take number two. A student who fails in several exams is either lazy, okay, P, or lacking in talent. Now, class, since you're already familiar with the pattern P and Q, you can actually substitute it with your own symbols. I mean, if you don't like the P and the Q, you can do your own symbols. Like, for example, in this case, instead of using P and Q, we can do it this way. Either lazy or lacking in talent. You can do it that way. Okay? Because these are just guides. Okay? So he said, John is lacking in talent. Is not lacking in talent. Not lacking in talent. Therefore, John is lazy. Okay? Now, take a look at the disjunction. Is lazy and lacking in talent, are they mutually exclusive? Is that a proper disjunction?
Improper, sir.
That is improper. Why? Because a student can be both lazy and lacking in talent. Right? Now, we said that if it is an improper disjunction, the only valid procedure is denying process. Right? Now, let's take a look here. John is not lacking in talent, therefore he is lazy. So we follow the denying process. Okay? And valid or invalid?
Valid. Valid.
Valid.
It's valid. That is a valid argument. Okay? Questions? Hello, questions? I have here some long examples already. Let's take the shorter. Okay, what about this one? Let's take number 2. Oh. By the way, I have uploaded the PDF file of this PowerPoint in our course site. So you can check the materials already. You can start practicing, answering some of the examples here. No? Okay, let's take number 2 here. That is a conjunctive syllogism. A person cannot face the sun and face his own shadow at the same time. Okay, so let's not use the P and Q anymore. Okay? We can still use that, but so that you will be guided, you know what is this conjunct. You just use the sum of the letters. So let's say sun, no, and shadow. Okay, so you can put it this way: cannot be sun and shadow. Meaning, so you should know that it's your own schema. Okay, you cannot face your own shadow at the same time. No, face the sun and shadow at the same time. I'm not facing the sun, not the sun. Therefore, I am facing my shadow. Therefore, shadow. That's a disjunction. That's a conjunctive, right? Now the question is this a two-part conjunction or a multiple conjunction? When you
Two
face a
part.
certain direction, when you face a certain direction, can you only face your shadow and the sun?
No.
No,
It's multiple.
because it's a multiple. So again, you think, right? Think of the content, think of the substance of the statement. Is it possible for me to face other direction than the sun and my own shadow? When you think, if the sun is here on my side, then my shadow is here on the other side. That means I am neither facing the sun nor facing my shadow. I am facing this direction. So it's a multiple conjunction, right? Now, look at this. It followed the denying process. So he's not facing the sun, therefore he is facing his shadow. It followed the denying process. Valid? Valid? What do you think? It's a multiple disjunction. It follows the denying process. So,
Invalid.
yes, invalid. This is invalid. You see, class, it's not just about, you know, following the procedure, writing the schema. No, it's really understanding what is the argument all about. Okay, the symbols, the patterns, they are guides in determining whether an argument is valid or invalid, or good or bad argument. We still have to understand what is the whole argument all about. Okay, the next topic will be one of the variations of syllogisms. You see, the standard form of the syllogism are the two general types, namely the categorical syllogism and the hypothetical syllogism. Okay. Uh, but aside from these uh, two basic, okay, two basic standard forms of syllogisms, there are other forms, there are other varieties or variations of the syllogisms. You can see here in the PowerPoint that there are, aside from the categorical and the hypothetical, there are the enthymeme, the epicureme, the polysyllogism, the soroid, and the dilemma. We're not going to discuss all of these variations of syllogisms, because these variations are for the philosophy, philosophy students, and for those who are really interested in logic. Well, what we are going to discuss here would just be one variation of the syllogism called the enthymeme. Okay, because the enthymeme, although the name may sound rather strange, it is actually one of the most common forms of argument. Okay, this is the kind of argument, the kind of syllogism that we normally, usually do, or that we usually form, okay, or that we usually use in our conversation, even in our writings. Okay, so we'll focus on the enthymeme. So what is the enthymeme? The enthymeme is an abridged syllogism, okay, or an abbreviated syllogism, meaning it is a syllogism or an argument that does not contain all the uh, propositions, meaning it does not normally contain the two premises and the conclusion. And it's not always written in a very structured form or manner. Like, for example, you always have the major premise on the top, and then the second would be the minor premise, and then at the end would be the conclusion. The enthymeme is not written that way. Okay? So it contains only two propositions, while a third proposition is implied or simply left to the mind. Okay, so instead of the usual three, you only have two propositions there. Okay, and of course, there should be another proposition to complete the syllogism or the argument. But this third proposition is never stated. It is already implied in the two propositions, and therefore it's just at the mind of the speaker, okay, or at the mind of the one who makes the enthymeme. Okay, now there are three orders of enthymeme. Okay, the first order contains only the minor and conclusion. The major premise is implied. By implied, meaning it is not fully constructed. Okay. Now, the second is you only have the major and the conclusion, and the minor premise is just implied, meaning it's not fully stated. Okay. And then the third, of course, would have the two premises, the major and the minor premises, and the conclusion is just implied. That's the third order. Okay, so it's an abbreviated syllogism or an abridged syllogism. Now, I'll show you some examples. Okay, so here you will see the standard syllogism. So, like, all human beings must be respected, the poor is a human being, therefore the poor must be respected. That is a standard syllogism because you have here the major premise, the minor premise, and the conclusion. Here, another example of a standard. All vices must be avoided. Smoking is a vice. Ergo, smoking must be avoided. So you see here, this is a standard syllogism because you have the three propositions there. Or if you have a conditional syllogism, it will go this way. If there is no rain, then the crops will die. But the crops will not die, therefore it rains. Now, what about the enthymeme? If you have a syllogism like this one, you can just say, the poor must be respected because he is a human being. That is an enthymeme. So I said, the name may be quite strange, but when you read it, this one, that's actually how we converse, right? That's actually how we talk. Okay? If we tell people to respect the poor and we argue that they should be respected, we do not say all human beings must be respected. The poor is a human being, therefore must be respected. That sounds funny, right? When you talk to people like that, you can just say, the poor must be respected because the poor is a human being. And that's the normal, usual way of conversing. That's the normal and usual way of arguing. Not like this. Of course, you will ask, then why do the standard? Well, we do the standard form for the sake of analyzing, checking whether the argument is good or bad, whether it is valid or invalid. Because for us to see and check if the argument is valid, we have to identify its basic parts. And this is how we do it, by writing it in its standard form. But since in our conversation, when we argue, we are just after, putting, expressing our views, arguing, then we do it this way in the enthymeme form. That is why I said the name enthymeme may be quite strange or foreign to you, but just exactly how we argue and we express our own arguments. So how do we say to people to avoid smoking? We don't do it this way. You don't tell your friend who's smoking, you don't try to convince him by saying all vices must be avoided. Smoking is a vice, ergo smoking must be avoided. That's very funny, right? We can just say like this: all vices must be avoided, so smoking must be avoided, or avoid smoking. That's the usual way of doing it or expressing it. Okay. Instead of saying if there's no rain, then the crops will die, but the crops will die or will not die, and therefore it rains. You can just say, well, if there are no rain, the crops will die, but the crops will not die. So this is the standard, and this is the enthymeme. Okay. So that's the enthymeme form. But of course, since we are our purpose is to check if the argument is good, if the argument, whether it's an enthymeme, is good or not, valid or invalid, then we must be able to analyze this enthymeme, okay, express the enthymeme into this form, and then check if this enthymeme, once reduced to this form or converted into this form, is a valid or invalid argument. Okay, now the question is, how do we do that? Okay, how do we do that? Now, remember that a standard syllogism, like this one, will have major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. And the conclusion here contains the minor term, the subject, and the major term, the predicate. Okay? And remember that we have some indicators whether a part of the argument is conclusion or premise. Okay? Now, hence is a premise indicator, right? Ergo, premise indicator. Now, if we go focus our attention to this enthymeme, it will give us hint which part is the conclusion and which part is the premise. Like for example here, the poor must be respected because he is a human being. The term because is a premise indicator, meaning this introduces the premise part. Remember, the premise contains the reason, okay, the reason, the basis. And the conclusion is the claim. So if you say the poor must be respected because he is a human being, that means he is a human being is a reason, okay, as indicated by this term because. It's a reason. Reason for what? Reason for the poor to be respected. So we know that this is a premise, and this one is a conclusion. Okay? Now, let's go to the second. All vices must be avoided. Excuse me. So smoking must be avoided. That means so is a premise indicator. That means smoking must be avoided. Oh, sorry. So is a conclusion indicator. Therefore, this part is the conclusion, and this one is now the premise. Okay. Now, so you go back to the indicators. All right. They will tell us so because, since, for, due to. These are premise indicators. But when you see terms like so, ergo, thus, therefore, consequently, then they are conclusion indicators. Okay. Now, some terms, some conjunctives, okay, indicate that the two propositions are premises. Like for example here, but, okay, but meaning it joins the premises. Okay. So but, what else? Also, and, further, they indicate that the two propositions are premises. Okay. That means you have to supply the conclusion, or the conclusion is implied. Okay. Now, let's have a practice here. So this is an example of an enthymeme. A democratic form of government gives more freedom than a communist one. For which reason, the Philippine government is considered to be democratic. Now, that is an enthymeme. So we want to determine, to identify which part is the premise and which part is the conclusion. Okay. So let's analyze this. For which reason? This is a premise indicator. Okay, this one. For which reason? If that is a premise indicator, then the part that it introduces is a premise. Okay, so this one, yeah, this one. A democratic form of government gives more freedom than a communist one. Because when you say for which reason, meaning this reason, the democratic. Okay, that's a premise. And if that is a premise, that means the last statement, the Philippine government is considered to be democratic, is the conclusion. Okay, so that is analysis, meaning we have identified the parts of the argument. Which part is the premise, which part is the conclusion. Okay, this is very important, class, because when you write or when you read an article or when you analyze and examine an article, the first thing that you should be able to determine is what is the argument, what is this paper all about, what is its claim, what is its conclusion, and how does it support the conclusion, what are the premises, what are the evidences and proofs presented. Okay, so that's very important. Now let's continue. So we now highlight the parts. Okay, the next thing that we do is, so we have identified that this is a premise, this is a conclusion. Now we wanted to complete the argument, meaning reconstruct the argument so that we are able to form the basic standard form. Okay, now take note that we need to supply what is the implied statement, because you have the two statements there, and the third one is implied. Okay, Now, how do we know the implied statement? The implied statement is formed by joining the two parts, okay? Two parts of the argument. But before we can do that, we have to identify first what is the common term. Because remember, class, that in a standard syllogism, every part or every term is mentioned twice, used twice. We go back to this example here. So you have the standard syllogism, human beings, poor, poor, respected, expected. Every term mentioned twice or used twice. Even in a hypothetical syllogism. Look, no rain, rain. Crops will die, crops will not die. It's always mentioned twice. Okay? So, here, human being, sorry, uh, poor, he. He means the poor, right? So it's the same. Poor, he refers. So this is mentioned twice. All vice must be avoided, 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 twice. Okay? Crops will die, crops won't die, twice. So what is the point? The implied statement is formed by joining the two parts or two terms that were only used once. Okay? What do you mean? We form a statement by using these parts or these terms that have been used only once. How do we do that? Well, we cancel the common term, meaning the term that has been used twice already. Okay? Let's illustrate that here. Let's use this syllogism here. Okay? So, what is the common term here? The common term is the red, the one in red. Democratic form of government, democratic. In this case, the democratic form of government is no longer completed the second time it is used because it's already implied. That's the purpose of the enthymeme, that we don't become redundant, because the standard syllogism is too redundant, keeps repeating the same terms. Okay, so we don't want to be redundant in an enthymeme. When we converse, we don't want to be redundant, right? We want to express our ideas, our arguments in a, in a much in the simplest form possible. So this is the common term, democratic form of government, democratic. What do? We cancel this. Okay? Of course, for which reason is the indicator that this is a premise. So, if we cross this democratic form of government, democratic, because that's a common term, we are left with gives more freedom than a communist one and the Philippine government. Okay? And that is the terms that we are going to use in order to form the implied proposition. Okay? The implied proposition. So what would be the implied proposition here if we cancel this and this? The implied proposition would be the Philippine government gives more freedom than a communist one. Okay? That is now the implied statement. So it's important that we know what is being implied here. What is the third statement? Okay? Let's go back to the three examples that we have, and let's try to form the implied statement. Again, the first step is to cross out the common term. What is the common term here in this first enthymeme? Anyone? Hello?
The poor and
Must be
human being.
respected.
No, what is the common? The twice mentioned already. The
The
poor must be
poor.
respected because he is a human being. So the poor here, and of course he is the pronoun for the poor, is the common term, right? So we cross this, and we are left with be respected and human being here. Okay, so we form a statement out of those two. So what should be the statement? What's the implied statement?
Human beings must be respected.
That's correct. The human being must be respected. That's the implied statement. What about number two? All vices must be avoided. So smoking must be avoided. Obviously, must be avoided is the common term, right? We cross this, avoided, and we are left with what's the implied statement?
Smoking.
Smoking
Smoking. As
and smoking is smoking is what?
Is a vice.
Yes, smoking is a vice. Okay. Remember, we are forming assertions, not necessarily a complete sentence. It's assertion. Okay. Let's go to the third. If there is no rain, the crops will die. But the crops will die. Obviously, these are premises. So the implied statement there should be the conclusion. So what will be the conclusion? What is implied? What's the implied statement? Meaning the conclusion.
It rained.
It rained. Correct. It rained, or there is rain, or there was rain. Okay. So that is the implied statement. Okay. Now keep that in mind. How we do that? Okay. Let's go to some of these examples. Okay. I will go back to this here. Okay. Here. So we are going to form the implied statement. Okay. Iron, zinc, copper, and aluminum are metals, and therefore they are conductors of electricity. First, what is the common term here?
They and
They,
iron, zinc, copper, and aluminum.
correct. They represents these metals, right? This iron, zinc, copper, and aluminum. So we cross this out, and they, because therefore is the indicator, right? This is the conclusion. So what will be the implied statement?
Metals
Met
are conductors of electricity.
Correct. Okay, correct. That's correct. Okay, now let's move to the next. Unless you do penance, you shall perish. I do not notice many people doing penance. Obviously, these are premises, no? So what would be the implied conclusion here? The common term there, of course, is doing penance, right? So you cross that.
I I do not notice many people perish.
No, no, yeah, that's the involved terms. But what should be the correct statement?
Many
Many
people
people
will not
is
perish.
fairness.
What? Many people.
Many people will not perish. Shall not
No,
perish. Huh?
shall no.
Many people shall perish.
That's correct. Many people shall perish because unless here that means if you do not do penance, unless means class, unless means if not. Okay, keep that in mind. Unless means if not. Some people, this is just a side discussion. Many people would say this way, not unless, okay? You will, they say, you will fail not unless you study. Think, think about that. You will fail not unless you study. When you say not unless means if not. When you say not unless, that means double negation if. So if you simplify the statement, it will be like you will fail if you study. It does not make sense. Why would you fail if you study? See? But obviously what they meant is this. You will fail not unless you study. That means the not there does not apply to the unless. Okay? It applies to the if you study. So you see, sometimes it's very confusing. So you have to be clear when you say unless. You don't say you will starve not unless you work hard. If you think about it, why would you starve if you work hard? Because not unless is a double negation. The right way of saying it is you will starve unless you work. Meaning you will starve unless, meaning if you don't work. You see? So the double negation is always a nuisance in, in writing. Anyway, let's go back to this example. If you do not do penance, you will perish. I do not notice many people doing penance. So the implication is that many people shall perish. Do you understand, class? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's move to the next. Matter is compressible. It must therefore be molecular. Now, before I answer the question, I will have one more question. Which one here is the conclusion? Matter is compressible or molecular is it meaning matter be molecular in structure. Which is the conclusion? The first or the second? This or this? The first or the second? This is the first. This is the
First,
second.
First.
Ang conclusion?
Last,
The
kasi,
last.
kasi po
Yeah,
may indicator na therefore.
correct. Correct. Okay, so here, so what is the common term? It means
Matter.
matter. Correct, matter. So you cancel it and matter, you are left with compressible and molecular in structure. All right. So what is the implied proposition now? You know when you form the implied statement, you can add words so that it becomes grammatically and syntactically correct. That's the answer. Obviously,
Compressible is molecular in structure.
okay, but it's better to put it this way: anything molecular in the structure is compressible. Okay. Now, how do you do that? How do you know which one should be the subject and which one should be the predicate? This is how you do this. So you have the two terms. Normally, in a sentence, the subject is the more specific. Okay. And the predicate is the more general. Like, for example, you're going to form a statement out of Socrates and man. How do you form a statement out of this? Do you say, a man is Socrates? Or Socrates is a man?
Socrates is a man.
Right?
Criticism.
Correct. And you know how you do it because Socrates is the more specific, that's the subject. The more general term, man, should be the predicate. Clear? Okay.
Yes
So,
po.
again, these are part of critical thinking. This is how we should, this is how our mind should work, how it should analyze things. Now let's move on to the next. A disease caused by germs is environmental in character. Ergo, obviously, the last one is the conclusion because of the ergo. It can be controlled by appropriate methods of sanitation. Now, the crucial here is it is a predicate, right? What does it signify? This is a pronoun of what? Is it disease caused by germs or environmental? Environmental in character. So, it, this is a pronoun, right? This is a pronoun of which noun here? It stands for what? A disease caused by germs or environmental in character? Anyone?
A disease caused by germs.
Correct. Disease caused by germs. So that means this is the common term. You cancel that. You are left with environmental in character and can be controlled by appropriate methods of sanitation. So now, how do we form the implied statement?
Environmental in character can be controlled by appropriate methods of sanitation.
That's correct, sister. Anything that is environmental
Any
in character can be controlled by appropriate methods of sanitation. Okay, good. Now, here, let's answer the first one. Communism, simply because it is a godless philosophy, contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction. What's the common term?
communism
Correct. That's
and
communism. And of course,
godless
it.
philosophy.
Okay?
It.
It. Communism and it. It stands for communism. So
Mhm.
we cancel this. What is the implied statement now?
A godless philosophy contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction.
Very good. Perfect. That's the implied statement. Okay. Let's move to the next. Whoever is not just is not of God, nor is he just who does not love his brother. These are premises. So the conclusion is not there. So what is the conclusion? So the common term is not just, right? He who is not just. What's the answer?
Who does not love his brother is not of God.
Correct. He who does not love his brother is not of God. So that's how you identify the implied statement. Now, let's try to reconstruct the whole argument. How do we do that? So we already know what is the implied statement. The implied statement is the third statement. There are already two statements that are expressed, meaning it's there in the Enthymeme. So for example here, a democratic form of government gives more freedom than a communist one, for which reason the Philippine government is considered democratic. So, okay, so here we have arrived that the Philippine government gives more freedom than the communist one is the implied statement. Okay, now, how do we know if this statement is a premise or conclusion? That's easy because this is the indicator. Okay, that means this is a premise indicator. This is a premise. Okay, the other one is the conclusion. If the conclusion is already there, then this implied statement is a premise. But the question is, what premise? Which premise? Is it the major premise or the minor premise? Again, that should be easy. Okay, like this. Okay, let's go back to this statement. Now remember, this is the conclusion. Okay, and the subject of the conclusion is the minor term. Okay? And the minor term should be in the minor premise. This is the major term considered to be democratic. That is the major term, and the premise that contains this should be the major premise. Look at this. A democratic form of government gives more freedom than the communist one. It contains considered to be democratic here. That means this is the major premise. And the implied premise is the minor. You understand? Okay, because of course that's why we have studied the parts of the conclusion, no? Because the conclusion gives you the major and the minor terms. Okay, now let's now try to reconstruct this. So you have now this implied statement. This implied statement must be the minor premise because this is the major premise. Remember, the major premise is always the more general. The more specific is the minor premise. And between democratic form of government and Philippine government, democratic government is more general than Philippine government, right? So let's try to reconstruct this. This is the given statement. This is now the major premise. This is the conclusion based on this. And then we supply this implied statement, and that is the minor premise. By rewriting the enthymeme, this one enthymeme like this, we can now analyze if this argument is a valid argument by applying now the rules. Okay? So that's how we analyze an argument. Okay? Whether this kind of enthymeme is a valid argument or not. Then we apply now the rules that we have studied about categorical argument, hypothetical argument, and so on and so forth. Okay, any question? Any question?
None po.
Good. The important thing here, class, is to be able to, like for example, I give you this statement, be able to know what is being implied here. What is being left to the mind? Because many times we hear an argument, we hear, people say this and that. In order for us to understand the whole thing, the whole argument, the whole thought, must be able to see, must be able to understand what is being implied here. What are the things that are left unsaid? Because that's the purpose of the enthymeme. The enthymeme works that way. And that's how we actually talk. That's how we actually converse, we express our ideas. There are many things that will live to our mind. But in order for us to appreciate, for example, what the other person is talking, we must be able to supply. So what does it mean? What is the implication of this? What is the implied statement here, etc., etc.? Okay? So that's part of critical thinking. That's part of understanding, when you read, for example, an article, when you read, term papers, etc., when you read reports, you must be able to understand what are the implications, what is being implied here, what is the unsaid, what is the not written, in order for us to understand the whole, the whole thing, we have said in critical thinking, in order to understand the context, to understand the subject matter, the topic. Okay, and this is a good exercise in being able to do that. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. That's the end of the lecture. I hope you get to. It's not just enough that you understand this. We must be able to practice, no, practice. So if you get given a statement, so you read this, what is the implication here? What is his main point? Because the main point is normally the conclusion, and how does he support the main point with good evidence, with good, premise or premises? Okay, because of course, especially nowadays, we read a lot, uh, you know, social media, Facebook, the news, and so on and so forth. And there are many things that are actually left unsaid. And in order for us to understand the whole thing, we must be able to understand what are those things that are left unsaid, that are just implied, those that are left to the mind. Okay, because we don't always argue, as we've said, in the standard form. We argue in the enthymeme form most of the time.